Guilty. Guilty is the verdict. So real estate agents watching this and the general public also who is looking to buy or sell real estate in the near future, this video is for you. We're going to be talking about the massive class action lawsuit that happened in the United States and the verdict after 2.5 hours of deliberation by a jury found all of the defendants guilty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put somewhere here on screen the article so that we can read it together. This is from Inman News, and what I'm going to go through is I'm going to read through the important points of this article, summarize it a bit for you so that you can get some context into what has just transpired. If you're a real estate agent watching this, you might be anywhere in the world, but if you're in Canada, there's a similar class action lawsuit that has been started. We don't know where that is as yet, but in the United States, if you're a real estate agent there, I'd love to hear your comments about this and what you feel about it, and basically what you feel the industry future is going to be. And for the general public, if you're watching this and you recently bought or sold a home, or you're contemplating a move in the near future, perhaps you're an investor, you're a homeowner, or you're a first-time buyer, we're going to be talking about some implications this might have on real estate. So let's flip over to the article. Jury awards $5 billion with a B, dollars to home sellers in landmark Sitzer Burnett verdict. So the jurors in the 2-week commission trial shocked the real estate industry. This happened on Tuesday. Today's Wednesday, November 1, 2023, as of when I'm recording this. This happened just yesterday, if you're watching this today. Otherwise, it's happening on Tuesday, October 31st, 2023. Awarding an astonishing $5.36 billion in damages to home sellers after deliberating for 2 hours and 28 minutes. So it didn't take them too long. Like sometimes these jury deliberations take a very long time, but this one didn't take too long. So it's going to be very interesting what the real estate industry goes through after this. Of course, as an aside, the National Association of Realtors is going to seek an appeal of this particular verdict. We're going to have to see where that goes. But let's go through this article together. Basically, the lawsuit represents, the class action lawsuits, it represents 500,000 Missouri home sellers seeking reimbursements for $1.78 billion in commissions. Now, this happened with their home sales that were paid to brokers. The jury awarded the $1.78 billion in damages, which under law, the article uses automatically treble. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really tell you why that is the case. If you're a lawyer watching this, I'd love to hear your comments. But apparently that balloons to $5.356 billion. That's a lot of money. The 8th jury person deliberated for about 2.5 hours on Tuesday morning before issuing its unanimous verdict. And this is what they deliberated about. So the jurors were asked to find whether home seller plaintiffs in the class action lawsuits had proved by a preponderance of the evidence that a conspiracy existed to follow and enforce a National Association Realtor policy known as a cooperative compensation rule. Basically, the case specifically centered on whether there was a conspiracy in the suits for subject multiple listing services in Missouri between April 29, 2015 all the way to June 30, 2022. The jury said yes, and also found that the conspiracy had the purpose or effect of raising, inflating, or stabilizing broker commission rates paid by home sellers. Now, at the conspiracy, where allegedly was a National Association of Realtors, Keller Williams, Anywhere, which was formerly known as Realogy. They own several brands in the real estate franchising space. Remax, Home Services of America, and its subsidiaries, HSF affiliates and BHH affiliates. Now, the two, if you recall a previous video that I did, Remax and Anywhere both settled. And their respective settlements, some of that was shared in the news. And so in hindsight, especially for Remax, which I work with, Remax Brokerage, Remax Hallmark Realty Limited in Toronto, this was a good news for its investors that it settled. It wasn't, in their statement, wasn't an admission of guilt by any means. And of course, they're also doing whatever it takes to be able to comply with anything that's the outcome of this, or be proactive in some of the policies that it has to its franchisors. But basically, franchisor or franchisee, whichever one buys a franchise from Remax. But For its investors, it was more of a move to settle in terms of being able to, I guess, to be certain about what the outcome of this. Like, in hindsight, it's a good move for its investors because think about it. If RE/MAX was a part of this lawsuit, now depending on whether the appeal ends up moving in the favor of the defendants or not, but it would have cost hundreds of millions because this lawsuit is $5 billion in damages. And from what I recall, RE/MAX settled for something along the lines of $55 million. I'll have to look up that fact, but I think it was $55 million settlement. Versus if they had gone through with this, and let's say the appeal over years doesn't turn in their favor, that would be hundreds of millions of dollars, probably more. So in hindsight, for its investors, it's a good move. Now we're going to be talking about what it affects the general public or consumers, buyers, sellers, investors, real estate clients. We're going to be talking about that in the end. Because it's going to be very important for you to know how to navigate your real estate transaction amidst all of this happening. I know this is a U.S. lawsuit. For us Canadians, there may be a similar effect when this plays out here in Canada. But basically, the jurors found the conspiracy had caused plaintiffs to pay more for real estate brokerage services when selling their homes than they would have without this supposed conspiracy. Now, here's what the conspiracy is, and I'm talking about it from a real estate broker, a real estate industry is where I work. So basically, the way real estate commissions work is when a listing agent is engaged, their services or the brokerage's services are engaged by a home seller. The home seller has to pay the commission. Now, typically, and one of the cases, if you really read into this and watch all the videos about this, one of the allegations made by the plaintiffs is that these commissions were fixed. So some of the training programs suggested 6% commission. In some coaching or training and mentoring, whatever programs, they suggest a 5% commission. Now, the defendants allege that, hey, we've got a base, sorry, the defendant said to counter this, to rebut this, basically is that, we have to come up with some sort of a benchmark or some sort of an industry rate to use as either a comparison or to use as a basis for our examples, right? So you and I know this. If you're in the real estate industry, there is no such thing as a fixed 5%, 6%. In fact, in the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, you can ask around and ask all the different realtors, how much do they charge? And you have anywhere from $0 and a flat fee all the way up to 6%, maybe even higher. Like, there is no such thing as a fixed commission. So the next time, if you're watching this as a consumer, the next time you're negotiating with your real estate agent, go ahead and propose what you feel is a right commission for you. And then going back and forth and negotiating with your realtor, keeping in mind value, services offered, performance, experience, and results, make sure that you know what you're getting for what you're paying. Right? So there is no such thing as an industry standard commission. Now, the plaintiffs sort of suggested that based on the training materials, there was some sort of a 5% or a 6% suggested. But let's take for granted a commission is 5%. From a seller's perspective, 5% commission is broken down to two parties, the listing brokerage and the cooperating brokerage, or the brokerage that represents the buyer. And this commission is typically split. Like traditionally, it was 50-50. Whatever the total commission was charged was split 50-50. Now, in today's market, and what I see in the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board as a broker manager, a leadership team of this brokerage, we see all sorts of different, what you may call splits. But essentially, the listing agent charges what they feel is worth it for their services. Let's say it's 1, 2, 3, whatever percentage it is. And then they offer something to the buyer's agent as compensation for bringing in a buyer, right? Now, what that offer is stipulated on our listing agreements. It says that out of the total listing commission, this is what is going to be offered to a buyer's agent. And that, on the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, I think the minimum is 1 penny. So a seller has the ability to choose what to offer to their buyer agent. It could be a penny. But then this also opens up a whole can of worms that was brought up in this lawsuit, because think about it. What would incentivize a buyer agent to show a property if they're not getting compensated for it? So let's say you're a seller, you give your listing agent 2.5%, 3%, 1% even, or even $500 if that's what you're paying. But you offer a buyer agent 1 penny. Who's going to show that home? Now, according to Real Estate Council of Ontario, Real Estate Business Brokers Act, which is soon to be Trust and Real Estate Services Act, A real estate agent cannot filter the homes they show to a potential buyer based on the compensation. And so on our Toronto Regional Real Estate Board system, you can't filter listings by commission. You can see what's being offered to a cooperating brokerage, but you can't filter it out, right? On the actual buyer representation agreement, if you're working with a buyer agent who's representing your best interest, it says on there, however, that the buyer agent can be compensated X amount of fee and whatever the deficiency is. Now, a lot of you may not know this. Some real estate agents probably don't know this because they don't read these agreements. But the 2.5% or 3% or 1%, whatever a buyer agent decides their services are worth, any deficiency between that and what is actually offered by the seller on the property is to be paid by the buyer, believe it or not. Now, it's up to the buyer agent to whether they want to pursue that difference, whether they don't want to pursue that difference. In my situations, like I've never pursued a difference. Like sometimes we were offered 2.5, sometimes we were offered 2.25. Some real estate agents do. I've never gone and pursued a difference. It's all a matter of what you feel is appropriate in your situations, right? And there's some situations where you work with a buyer and you show them 1, 2, 5, or 10 or 12 houses and they buy one. And others where you show 50, 60, 100 houses and they never buy anything. So all of these cases are different. There's no one prescribed way of doing things. It's up to you how you want to do it. But the problem with that is this. If I, as a real estate broker, am expecting that my services will yield 2.5% commission, and what's being offered by the seller is 1 penny, guess who pays the difference in that equation? The buyer does, according to the buyer representation agreement. So if you're a home buyer right now watching this, make sure you read that agreement very carefully and you ask your buyer agent, hey, if the seller doesn't pay your commission, am I supposed to pay that out of pocket? Because that's what this agreement says, right? I'll link to that agreement, or I'll put something along the lines of that wording so that you all understand what that means. Now, why is this an important thing to bring up in this particular video? The reason why is because with this lawsuit, with this verdict as a result of this class action lawsuit, if things happen in the real estate industry that causes a change, and one of those changes being a complete decoupling or detachment between the selling commission and the buying commission, that means that you as a buyer, as the consumer, are actually at risk of having to pay the entire commission out of your pocket. Now, I know some financial companies will probably be genius and say, hey, why don't we create a product out of this? Just like mortgages, why don't we create a product where you can pay your commission in installments? Maybe I'm giving you guys that idea. Maybe that's going to exist already. Who knows? But the truth is this. If you're a buyer, and if this lawsuit has a ripple effect all throughout the US and Canada, and the real estate boards change the rules, and instead of even requiring just a penny, they can no longer require a seller to pay anything at all to the buyer if they didn't want to. I mean, in some scenarios, they might be able to offer something to the buyer agent. Who knows how this will transpire or unfold. But let's say, for example, like in New York, one of the boards, from what I remember, had totally said that, you know what, buyers, you've got to ask for your commission directly from the seller. It cannot be paid from the listing brokerage anymore. And whatever that amount is, you've got to speak directly to the homeowner, the home seller, for your commission. So what does this mean for buyers? Either you're going to be paying your entire agent's commission out of your pocket as a result of a successful sale. So let's say it's 2.5 on $1 million. That's $25,000 now you've got to pull out of your pocket. Now, where was it being compensated before? Well, think about it. If a home seller sells for $1 million and their commission is, let's say, 5%, don't get me in trouble for suggesting that there's a set commission or anything. We're just using this as a hypothetical. Let's say the commission was 5%. 2.5 goes to the listing agent. 2.5 goes to the buyer's agent. That 2.5, you essentially paid for it because you paid $1 million for the house. So real estate agents that are saying that my buyer services are free, that's not true. Because the buyer paid for the house. Yes, the buyer is not paying you directly that $25,000, but they paid $1 million for that house. 5% commission, it goes to the listing brokerage. That listing brokerage shares 2.5% to your buyer's agent. right? And so technically, yes, you did pay that commission. One could also say that, no, I didn't, because that's the seller. I mean, that 5% was taken away from the seller's proceeds. So $50,000 that the seller would have gotten, they didn't get, because they paid $25,000 to their agent, and then they paid $25,000 to the buyer agent. You can look at it all these different ways, but who's paying for the house? The buyer's paying for the house. So the buyer certainly paid $1 million for that house. However, that money gets split up in terms of commissions, fees, what the lawyer gets, what the home inspector gets, what the mortgage broker gets, what the real estate broker gets. It all depends on the context of how you want to look at it, I guess. But if this transpires and the commission is decoupled, you as a buyer will now have to pay directly to your agent. Where are you going to come up with that $25,000, for example, right? Now, for home sellers, what does it mean to you and to your agent? If buyers don't want to use the services of a buyer agent because of the fact that they have to pay $25,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 out of pocket, or more or less, whatever the home price might be, then where are they going to go? They're going to go directly to the listing agent now. Now, this is, at least in the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, I give credit to Robert Eade for giving me a little bit of a history lesson a while back. Buyer agency came into effect in the 90s because of the very fact that before that, buyers would go directly to the listing agent if they were interested in a house. And if they did work with another agent aside from the listing agent, it would be a sub-agent of the listing agent. What does that mean? That means that the listing agent, or whoever the sub-agent representing the buyer, actually, sorry, wrong wording here. Whoever's working with the buyer was actually representing the seller, not the buyer. The listing agent represents the seller. A sub-agent still represents the interests of a seller, so the buyer's interests were not protected. Why do you think buyer agency came into place? It was to solve this challenge or this problem of who's representing whose best interest. What we're seeing here is an unfolding, or it's an undoing of what took 2 to 3 decades of building up, 90s to 2000, 2010s, 2020s. All of this we're going back in times. We're becoming prehistoric again to a time, if this unfolds and if these rule changes happen, we're going back to where we're working with the listing agent. And the listing agent represents the interest of the seller. That's just the way it is in terms of how these agreements are worded. So again, going back to you as a consumer, to you as a home buyer, what does this mean to you? If you do not want to hire a buyer agent because of the fact that you don't have the money to pay for them out of pocket, yes, buying a home is expensive. Imagine coming up with land transfer tax, your deposit, whatever you're paying for your mortgage broker, if you need to. You now have to pay your real estate broker, right? So what does that mean? That's a lot of money out of pocket. So instead of me having to pay my listing broker, let me go directly to the listing agent or to the seller's agent. Well, guess what happens? The listing agent, seller's agent now has to do the showings. They now have to negotiate the sale. They now have to walk through that buyer all the way through to transaction, which was happening before. But what does it mean for commissions, right? Commissions are not going to decrease. I mean, it may decrease in a competitive environment, but it's not going to decrease by much. Why? Because the listing agents are now picking up that slack. The seller's agent is now having to do all that work. So if I'm a selling agent, if I'm the broker for the seller, and now I have to also work the buyer side of the transaction, there's nothing wrong with that. But the fees are going to go up. Whatever I charge the seller has to now factor in the fact that I'm going to be doing the showings. I'm going to be unlocking the lockbox, taking a buyer through, walking them through the house, explaining to them the features. Each of these showings is 20, 30, 45 minutes sometimes. I have to qualify them. I have to take them through the mortgage qualification process, introduce them to lawyers so that they can choose a lawyer to work with, attend the home inspection. Listing commissions will likely remain the same. So if they were 2, 3, 4, 5% now as a total commission, it's probably going to remain the same, right? Now, some of you might say there's going to be more competition as a result of this, perhaps. But there's already companies out there, do-it-yourself, FSBO companies, discount brokerages, low percentage brokerages. All of this already exists. So why does full service real estate commission model still exist? There must be a reason for that, right? So I don't want to ramble on. I know there's a lot of different things, but basically that's what this means. If the effect of this verdict ripples into the real estate industry as a whole in Canada and in the US, you will see changes To me, changes are great. They're fantastic. Do they necessarily represent the best interest of consumers? I know I'm going to sound biased by saying no, but you just have to use logic and common sense, right? These services are being rendered by real estate professionals. Whatever you feel about real estate professionals, good or bad, or you don't really care, there's still services that are being rendered by a professional. And to get somebody to do some work for you, like the lawyers, I mean, go and Google how much the lawyers are making out of this lawsuit, for example, right? So a professional to work for you and represent your best interests, if they're good, I'm not saying if they're bad, if they're good, they're worth the amount of value and the amount of compensation that they deserve. If they're bad, don't pay them. Don't even work with them, right? Find another service model that's going to work for you. Do the right thing for you, right? So you know what? I don't want to go on with this. I'm already 20 minutes or so into this video. Maybe I'll make a part 2 of this. But basically, if I were to summarize this for real estate agents, you've got to be really thinking about your service model, your value proposition model, because all the more now you've got, like, you already had to be explaining this to your clients. If you weren't doing that, I mean, that's a bad thing. You've got to explain what you're providing to your clients so that you set their expectations and you look after their best interests and you get the results that they need. For the consumer side, this may not be the best news, right? You may end up having to pay your real estate broker on the buying side directly. Maybe there's products that will be created to help you finance the commission. Maybe you're going to start to pay your real estate broker per hour. So every single time you go out and look for a house, maybe you're paying them a certain fee to do all of these services. Pay for service, perhaps, is what's going to happen. Some of you have commented in my previous videos, you know, lawyers make $600, $700, $800, $1,000 to close the sale of the house. Well, that's exactly what they do. They close the sale of the house for that amount of money. They don't qualify the buyer. They don't show the buyer properties. They don't show the property. They don't show 10 to 100 or more properties, that's for sure. They don't negotiate the sale. They don't write up the paperwork, right? They take the paperwork that a real estate broker, a real estate agent has taken, and then they close based on those documentations. They go into escrow. That's the terminology in the U.S. Lawyers don't go around showing houses, negotiating, getting insight into particular neighborhoods, sharing those insights, looking up local schools, talking about local developments. Lawyers close the transaction. They're a very essential part. But you can't compare the fee charged by a real estate broker to a real estate lawyer, because those are two different things. If you want to use a real estate lawyer as your real estate quote-unquote agent, I mean, here in Ontario, you can do that, Ontario, Canada, because if you have your lawyer license, you can trade in real estate, apparently, but get a lawyer to show houses to you. Get a lawyer to negotiate your sale, right? Get the lawyers to draft your agreements. They're not going to charge you the same amount of money as they charge just for the closing. It just doesn't make sense, right? So for consumers, this may not be the best thing. Yes, a lot of different business models will proliferate out of this. A lot of them will come out. There's going to be so many different variations and options and choices, or it may stay the same, right? Because everyone will realize, wait a minute, I don't want to pay $25,000 out of my own pocket to a real estate broker because I don't have that kind of money, in addition to my down payment and all of that other closing costs and all that sort of stuff, right? Sellers may realize that, look, my real estate agent has always been explaining this to me properly. I understand why I am paying buyer's agents for the work, because I'm incentivizing them to get buyers to buy my house. If you were a FSBO, for sale by owner, try getting a for sale by owner or for sale sign, stick it outside your property, do all the showings, do all the negotiation, qualify the right buyer, make sure they can actually close, make sure there's no hiccups on closing, make sure you don't get any lawsuits because of a misrepresentation or a lack of disclosure. There's a lot of liability in the real estate business that the consumer, general public may not understand. And who do you think is on the hook for that if something wrong were to happen in a real estate transaction? Real estate brokers are, right? So I hope you found this. It was a bit longer than I thought it was, but a lot of different things to talk about in this particular lawsuit. I'll create another follow-up video. The Canadian one, I'll keep you posted when that does come up. But if you have any questions about this, if you have any thoughts and ideas about what the future of real estate might bring as a result of this, I wanted to give you sort of an insight into what this real estate industry could look like as a result of this verdict. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye for now.